The telephone operator didn't disappear overnight. She was there for nearly 100 years, a real person on the other end of the line, connecting your call, answering your question, sometimes even talking you through an emergency. Then one day she was gone, replaced by a dial tone and a set of numbers you dialed yourself. Most of us adapted without really noticing, but the job itself, one of the largest female occupations in 20th century America, simply ceased to exist. Here's how it worked, why it mattered, and how it came to an end. In many towns and smaller cities, well into the middle of the 20th century, making a phone call didn't start with dialing. It started with picking up the receiver, waiting a moment, and hearing a voice come on the line. "Number, please." That was it. 2 words. The operator sat at a long switchboard, a console covered in jacks, cords, and small metal plugs. When your call came in, a light would illuminate on the board in front of her. She would reach for a cord, stiff from use, heavy at the end, plug it in, and say those 2 words. You gave her the number. She found the correct jack, pushed the plug home with a clean snap, rang the line, and waited to confirm someone answered. If the line was busy, she told you so. If no one picked up, she let you know. The whole transaction took seconds, and she was already moving to the next light before you'd set down the receiver. In smaller towns and rural areas, the operator often knew your voice. She might know your family. She knew which lines rang at the doctor's office, which belonged to the fire station, and which was your neighbor 3 houses down. If you called in and said, "Get me the hardware store," she knew what you meant. In larger cities, the exchanges were enormous rooms, rows and rows of women at switchboards, a low, continuous sound of voices speaking at once, each measured and calm, saying the same words hundreds of times an hour. The pace was constant. You had to be quick, accurate, and composed. Calls came in one after another, and the board never stopped lighting up. The work had its own language. Exchanges were identified by name: Pennsylvania 6, Murray Hill 5, Butterfield 8. When you gave an operator a number, you'd say the exchange name first, then the digits. Those names weren't just labels. They were small geographies. They told you something about where in the city a number was located. The operators were almost exclusively women, but that hadn't always been the plan. When the telephone exchanges first opened in 1878, the job went to teenage boys. A natural choice, since boys had been working as telegraph operators for years. The problem was that speaking to real people turned out to be very different from tapping out Morse code. The boys were impatient. They played pranks. They cursed at customers. Complaints piled up fast. The solution was Emma Nutt. On September 1st, 1878, she was hired by the Boston Telephone Dispatch Company, becoming the first female telephone operator in the world. Her voice was calm, her manner patient, her memory remarkable. She was said to have memorized every number in the New England Telephone Company directory. Within a few years, telephone companies across the country had standardized around female labor. By the end of the 1880s, the job was almost exclusively held by women. It was respectable, reliable work, the kind that a young woman from a working-class family might pursue before marriage, or that a widow might hold on to for years. In communities across the country, the telephone exchange was a fixture, and the operators who worked there were known. The telephone operator didn't disappear because she did her job poorly. She disappeared because the phone companies decided very early on that they needed to find a way to do without her. The economics were straightforward, and they were pressing. By the 1920s, telephone networks had grown to a scale where the labor cost of manual switching was becoming a serious problem. In a large city, a single exchange might employ hundreds of operators. Multiply that across a national network, and you had a workforce of enormous size, one that had to grow every time the network grew. The phone companies understood that if they were ever going to expand telephone service to the mass market and make it affordable, They had to reduce the cost of connecting calls. The solution had actually been conceived in the late 1880s by an undertaker in Kansas City named Almon Stroger and patented in 1891. Stroger was convinced that the local telephone operators were routing his business calls to a competitor, possibly one whose wife worked the switchboard. Whether that was true or not, his frustration led him to design an automatic switching mechanism, a device that could route a call without any human involvement at all. His invention was the Stroger switch, also called the step-by-step switch. It was mechanical and relatively slow, but it worked. Each digit you dialed would trigger a series of electrical pulses that moved metal contacts through a sequence of positions until they reached the correct line. No operator required. The problem was getting the public to accept it. Most telephone users in the early 20th century were deeply skeptical. They didn't want to dial numbers themselves. They found the process complicated and impersonal. They were used to a person answering. They trusted a person. The Bell system spent years managing this resistance. In some cities, they introduced dial service gradually, one exchange at a time, and ran public education campaigns explaining how to use the rotary dial. In others, they delayed conversion well into the 1940s because the local customer base was older or more rural, and the resistance was harder to overcome. World War II changed the calculation significantly. The war created severe labor shortages, and telephone companies found themselves unable to hire and retain enough operators to meet demand. The pressure to accelerate the shift to automatic switching became urgent. After the war,
the 1970s were a golden era for gadgets that promised the future and delivered the ridiculous. If it buzzed, blinked, or plugged into the wall, people bought it. Some of these contraptions smoked, sparked, or left you wondering if modern life required a minor electrical burn. Still, they were glorious, strange, and impossible to forget. Here are 10 bizarre 1970s gadgets we fully bought into. 1. Clairol Mist Stick. Imagine a curling iron that steamed your hair like a pot on the stove. The mist stick hissed and sputtered, filling bathrooms with a warm, slightly burnt salon fog. You clamped a section of hair, waited, and hoped for bouncy curls instead of a crispy line of damage. Steam plus electricity felt cutting edge back then, and if your hair came out curly, it felt like a miracle. 2. Ronco Egg Scrambler. Solving problems that didn't exist was a 1970s specialty. The Ronco Egg Scrambler promised a perfectly blended egg while it was still inside the shell, spun the egg like a carnival toy, and crossed your fingers that it wouldn't explode in your hand. The advertising made it look scientific and futuristic. In reality, it turned breakfast into a tiny engineering experiment. 3. AM/FM shower radio. Nothing said futuristic like hanging a plastic radio in the shower and shampooing to muffle top 40. The volume knobs corroded, antennas rusted, and the thing developed a permanent soap scum scent. Still, stepping into the shower with music felt like a Jetsons-level luxury, even if the sound was mostly static. 4. Ronco Glass Froster. Frosted glasses were a barroom luxury, and now you could get that effect at home instantly. The froster blasted glasses with cold air until they fogged over and occasionally gave you a hint of frostbite. It was loud, vibrating, reliable, but it made ordinary soda feel classy. 5. Tootaloop Radio. Shaped like a plastic donut straight out of a sci-fi set, the Tootaloop radio was all style and very little sound. You twirled it to tune stations and wore it like an accessory. The sound quality was rough, but the design felt futuristic and cool, enough to make listeners forgive a lot. 6. Electric hot dogger. The electric hot dogger cooked sausages by sending current through metal spikes thrust into the meat. Fast, efficient, and mildly horrifying, it lived on kitchen counters as evidence that technology could improve even the simplest foods. It also looked like a lawsuit in waiting, but people loved it anyway. 7. Mood lamps. From lava lamps and fiber optic strands to color-changing orbs, mood lamps promised to transform living rooms into mellow starship lounges. Most were just colored bulbs in odd shapes, but they created ambiance in a way overhead lights never could. Turn one on, and your den instantly felt warmer, weirder, and more future. 8. Plug-in scalp massager. This thing looked like an alien helmet and vibrated your skull like it was trying to read your thoughts. It rattled fillings and left hair staticky, but people plugged it in, leaned back, and declared themselves relaxed. It was futuristic self-care, awkward-looking but oddly satisfying. 9. Water pick early countertop models. Early water flossers were like tiny pressure washers for your mouth, loud, bulky, and capable of soaking everything within arm's reach. They took more space than a blender and sounded like a jet engine, but using one made you feel advanced about oral hygiene. 10. Snoopy toothbrush timer. Only the 1970s could call a wind-up Snoopy figure a dental breakthrough. You wound him up, let him tick away while kids brushed, and got a cheerful little mascot to keep toothbrushing on schedule. Most kids treated Snoopy like a toy, but the idea of a gadget that made brushing fun felt futuristic. These gadgets were clunky, overhyped, and sometimes dangerous, but they were ours. They gave ordinary routines a little spark of imagination, and even the failures are worth remembering. If you've got a favorite weird gadget from the era, share it. There are plenty more oddball treasures to dig up from the groovy electric 1970s.